Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Susie Morley, Leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements? Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please remember to use the chat function only to indicate that you wish to speak and not to post comments or questions. And please note that messages in the chat panel can be viewed by people watching the live broadcast. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I will now ask the Governance Officer to carry out the introductions.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to the Cabinet members, we have Councillor Eborn, Councillor Field and Councillor Wellham joining us today. Also in attendance are the Chief Executive and the Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Thank you very much. Can I move to the agenda, please? Item 1 is apologies for absence.
We have no apologies for absence today, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? No, thank you very much. Item 3 is MCA/20/25, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Mid-Suffolk Cabinet meeting held on the 4th of January 2021. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes, please? Could I have a proposer, please?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Flatman here. I'm happy to propose the minutes of the 4th of January.
Thank you, Councillor Flatman. And can I have a seconder, please?
Thanks. Councillor Haddingham here. Yes, I'm happy to second the minutes.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor. The Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you could go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner of your ModGov app. The vote for this item should now show, hold on one moment, should now show as in progress. Thank you. Just waiting for one vote. Thank you, members. That's 9 votes for, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting have been confirmed and will be signed at the next practicable opportunity. Moving on to item 4, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
And item 6 is matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or the Joint Audit and Standards Committees. And I'll now invite Councillor Wellham, who is Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mid-Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Committee considered a draft General Fund budget and 4-year outlook on the 14th of January. I made it clear that members of the committee should consider whether or not there was sufficient and clear information in the report and if the budget allocations were appropriate. I also made it clear that any political statements and preferences should be aired at the full council meeting on the 18th of February, not at overview and scrutiny. With that in mind, a number of suggestions were made where members felt that greater clarity would assist council in understanding the budget proposals. Also, in respect of the overarching principles in paragraph 6.4 on page 39, members felt that staff welfare and mental health are of great importance, and a reference to a strong focus on well-being of staff, which has been added to that paragraph, is to be welcomed. The committee also requested that additional funding be allocated for planning enforcement and legal costs associated with planning. Enforcement and legal issues around planning and planning appeals are often raised by residents and local councils, and it is considered additional resources would lead to an improvement in the service and a reduction in concerns and complaints raised with members. Also, the draft budget presented to overview and scrutiny on the 14th of January did not include specific grant applications and allocations. However, the report to overview and scrutiny on the 15th of February sets out allocations to citizens' advice, but does not include an index linking to the grant to Mid-Suffolk Citizens' Advice. We request that you confirm that index linking on a rolling 3-year agreement is intended. Citizens' Advice are aware that a separate application needs to be made by each separate community Citizens' Advice to preserve the 3-year rolling agreement with index linking. So the recommendations from overview and scrutiny are set out on page 13, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any queries. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. Does anybody have any questions? No?
I'll press on
Okay.
then with the draft HRA account and the 4-year outlook.
Okay.
Members considered the report and appendices and commended officers on the quality of the report. There were a number of queries around capital receipts and right to buy, which were dealt with by officers. Very few other comments were made, and the committee resolved to endorse the HRA budget and 4-year outlook, and the recommendation is set out on page 21. Again, if there are any queries, I'll be happy to try to respond.
Thank you. Any questions, anybody? No?
Brilliant.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Item 7, forthcoming decisions list. Does anybody have any comments on that? No. Item 8, MCA/20/28, special urgent decisions taken by officers during the COVID-19 pandemic period under delegated powers in accordance with Part 2 of the Constitution. So the recommendation is as listed in Appendix A on page 29. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, this is for noting only. Thank you very much. Item 9 is MCA/20/29 and is the general fund budget for 2021/22 and the 4-year outlook. I'll now invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Am I live and visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased now to introduce the report on the General Fund budget for 21-22 and the 4-year outlook, which is referenced as MCA 2029 and starts on page 31 of our report pack. Subsequent to the draft budget being debated here in January, it went before the ONS committee on the 14th of January. Members of that cross-party committee did ask some pertinent questions and made some very helpful observations, as we've already seen under item 6 of today's agenda. During my introductory speech to January's Cabinet, I suggested that funds be set aside out of the budgeted surplus to fund planned legal costs and planning enforcement actions. I reiterated those ideas at ONS, and I'm pleased to say they would appear to endorse them wholeheartedly. Thus, included in the budget figures before you today are a sum of £250,000 put into a reserve for planning legal costs, and a sum of £50,000 put into a reserve for planning enforcement actions. Of course, our residents expect us to be prudent and frugal with our expenditure, but I also believe they would equally expect us to be robust in defending any planning appeals that arise, and also to not shy away from any planning enforcement actions that are clearly justified. And to do these things properly does cost money, and with this budget, the funding is there. Now, there's been a significant change from the draft budget in one area in particular, and I'm speaking of our retained income from business rates. Members should note that during the ONS meeting, Councillor Caston did query the lack of growth in business rates, and our Section 151 officer responded by explaining that the draft budget figures were based on February 2020 information, as we only submit data annually each January to government. So we always knew that revised figures from that government return would be incorporated into the report now before you today. The baseline business rates have increased by 1.588 million, driven in large part from the large electricity substation at Bramford that's come on stream. The prior year business rates deficit has also moved by 762,000, so it's now in a surplus position of 678,000. Taking these in conjunction with other more modest adjustments, our funding has now been revised upwards by 2.39 million. Now, even as I speak, these business rate figures are being carefully scrutinised by members of the finance team, and some downward revisions are still likely. Every year I've expressed my frustration about the local government settlement only being announced just before Christmas, as that is not helpful to the budget process. And clearly, late revisions of this magnitude of our business rate numbers in January are equally, if not more, frustrating. But thankfully, at least the adjustments are positive. In our agenda addendum papers, members will find an addition to this budget report covering the flexible use of capital receipts. Our Section 151 officer can explain this flexibility in more detail, should members have any questions on it. But having reviewed it myself, I would put this opportunity quite firmly into what I call a no-brainer category, and therefore strongly recommend its adoption for 21-22 and potentially beyond. As an administration, we have a great vision for the future of our district. Great visions, of course, need substantial resources. And despite the significant setback to our economy from COVID-19, the improved financial outlook set out in this budget, when combined with our healthy brought forward reserves, we can look to the future with real confidence and ambition. We now anticipate ring-fencing 4 million from our Growth and Efficiency Fund to spend on our key strategic priorities of economy, housing, community and well-being. In addition, the amount we will raise this year from the 1.66% increase in council tax, a sum of £104,000, will be transferred to a new reserve for COVID-related business recovery. In conclusion, at a time when we hear that some councils across the country are facing real significant hardship, having to make difficult cuts to key services, or even having to worry about issuing Section 114 bankruptcy notices, I do trust that Cabinet today will be happy to endorse this sound and healthy budget for recommendation through to full council. Accordingly, I'd like to propose the recommendations to that effect in 3.1 of our report, to oppose the council tax increase of 1.66 set out in recommendation 3.2, and to endorse to full council the flexible use of capital receipts as set out in recommendation 3.3 and 3.4. I would look for a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair. It's Councillor Gould here, and I was delighted to second the budget report when it came to our January meeting, and I'm equally delighted to second this report. I won't repeat the things that I said at that earlier meeting. I will have things to say when it makes its third appearance, as it were, before the council. But safe to say, I will repeat my thanks to, or I'm sure our collective thanks to the finance team, the professional team, and to Councillor Whitehead himself for the professional way he has led that work, and to our collective benefit. In terms of, John has made, Councillor Whitehead has made reference to the improved business receipts position. I suppose the large station in Bamford might be considered good luck in a way, but it's often been said that the more effective and successful you are, the more luck you seem to get. Maybe that's the case here. I don't know. Finally, having spent a good part of my career trying to argue for more flexibility on the use of capital receipts, let's not let this opportunity to go by here and take the recommendations in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gould. So I'm now going to take questions from, well, anybody really. If you can use the hands up function, and I'll take questions from Cabinet members first, followed by anybody else who's got a question. Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. I just wanted to draw attention to paragraph 7.9, where we discuss allocating an additional 500,000 to the work of the Climate Change Task Force, which brings us up to, over the 2 years, approximately £1 million allocated to that work. It's really both maybe a question and a clarification that the biodiversity task force work is included within that, and that we anticipate committing funds and taking forward a lot of the actions of that task force in the near future. And the fact that on the surface it looks as if not very much of it is spent. Actually, an awful lot of work has gone on, and believe me, it will be spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. Did you want to respond, Councillor Whitehead?
Yes, I'm not quite sure exactly where the question was there, but I can say it's approximately to the nearest penny £1 million.
Grand. I think what I'm really saying is that this includes biodiversity and ecological work, and is not limited to the Climate Change Action Plan, just so that everyone is very clear on that point, which I think is really important.
Yes, absolutely. Why we've got the reserve renamed to say it's climate and biodiversity.
Yes, we need to get used to saying that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you. A bit quicker than I expected. I must inject before I ask a question that I think Bramford's entirely due to the local councillor. You may have a different view. Seriously, just a question: is that very useful council tax increase, business rate contribution, entirely a North Sea wind related issue? So it's determination of those wind farms, or is it associated with the other expansion and activities at Bramford? For instance, the connection for the proposed solar farms that are there. So that's one point. I did want to ask whether our very sound financial position at the moment is a significant contribution element for that our relatively low dependence on incomes from sales. We sell things like car parking spaces, obviously, but we lack large theatres and things like that have suffered tremendously. So is that a significant contribution, or are there other elements that I'm missing? And I think the third one, to stick at 3, I noticed in table 6, I think it is, there's obviously a series of forecasts. And it just surprised me that the business rate grant stays essentially level within, what's that, £4,000 over the period to 2024-5. And there seem to be a whole load of things there that are just absolute repeats year on year of exactly the same numbers. Is that because of the difficulty of forecasting, or is that really what we expect, or are we not taking into account things like the government's acceleration of the compensation for business rates? So 3 questions there, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Field. In terms of your comment about Bramford, I'll happily pass that on to Councillor Caston. In terms of your other questions,
should have said Great Blakenham. Sorry.
Put me off my stride now. Growth in business rates. I don't know the details myself in terms of how much is to do with the wind farms and how much to do with the solar farms. I mean, it took me a bit by surprise that, I mean, I know it's a very large development up there, but I was surprised just the sheer scale of it. But obviously the business rates figure as revised covers growth in all areas, but I'm told that is the primary driver. In terms of, I think you're saying selling car parking spaces. Do you mean car parking income? But
yes,
yes.
I'm just saying, to what extent is it the fact that we don't focus extensively on selling things like that, and therefore our income is relatively fixed compared with others we could mention, or am I misinterpreting that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, compared to some tourist areas, I guess our car parking, we don't have the same opportunity to sort of charge people £4 an hour like some places do. And we don't have the same exposure to theatres, say, as Ipswich Borough Council. But there is such a wide range of various income streams that we do get in. That's why we're trying to reduce our reliance on council tax and going forward. And in terms of at table 6, my understanding, I'll refer to Catherine just to clarify or contradict, but we revise those numbers on this annual basis when we do this January return, but we don't at this present time anyway sort of forecast or sort of crystal ball ahead for future years, which is why we put the latest figures for the new budget year in now we have them, and then assume they continue over the next 4 years. But if Catherine would like to just add to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Yes, I think Councillor Field was saying, is it difficult to forecast ahead? And I think the simple answer is yes, because quite a lot is going to change around business rates over the next year or two. We've had the fair funding review has been put on hold. Business rates reset has been put on hold. So at the moment, I think until we know more about where some of those are going, and if the government does ever move to 75% retention of business rates, that will change things as well. So at the moment, it's a case of what we would change them to if we didn't. So we've taken the stance of just going flat at the moment with the figures for 21-22, and then we'll revise as we get more information.
Could I just ask if that then means we're taking a pessimistic or an optimistic view of, the future years up to say 24? 25.
Can I say it's a prudent view to assume no growth, but again, Catherine might want to just add to that.
I was going to say I haven't got a magic crystal ball in terms of the economy and where it's going to go and how it's going to recover, obviously, from the COVID pandemic. So, as Councillor Whitehead said, it sort of feels like a prudent thing to do at the moment until we have more experience.
Right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Field. Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Whitehead for your comments and introduction of the budget there today. And apologies, I couldn't make the meeting in January when you discussed this originally. I've got two questions, if I may. Firstly, I'm just not clear about what is the logic of budgeting for a £3 million surplus, as mentioned in paragraph 7.4. You mentioned priorities that certain priorities that you're going to put money away for future spend, but surely these should be live projects within the core budget so that our communities can actually see what their council tax is being spent on. So if you could explain why it's been done that way, thank you. And secondly, on paragraph 8.18, you refer to a increase in service charges for the use of Endeavour House at £43,000 a year. But it's been suggested that we may not ever fully move back into Endeavour House, and at least not in the amounts of people as before, and where most companies, including some of our Suffolk tenants, are negotiating rents downwards. So why are we paying for an increase? Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to ask the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Eburn. You make a good point in terms of the the £3 million surplus and the logic. Our strategic priorities cover a vast area. I did say in terms of housing, economy, communities and well-being, and as I said in my introduction, we're going to put £4 million across those four, possibly in equal amounts. We'll see how it comes forward, but those plans still are, well, beyond the embryo stage, but not really in detail enough to put real meat on in terms of this current budget. But the reality is that money is there, and the ambition is to spend that over the next 12 to 24 months. And I think in terms of the final presentation coming forward next week, those extra amounts will feed through, so the surplus, at least on the face of it, will not seem as large as that. And sorry, and just to your second point, 818 and the service charges, I'm not sure this was either raised at Cabinet in January or over your scrutiny, I forget which ones, but those are a figure that's been put in, again, prudently into the budget, but the reality is that's subject to negotiation, and obviously the amount we get charged will be based on that negotiation figure, and obviously we won't just pay the budget figure without a great deal of extra work beyond today.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Whitehead. If I could just come back, Chair, you mentioned plans being made for the housing, economy, communities and wellbeing. When will we see the first of those come forward, please? Thank you.
Well, I would say from late spring through summer, we'll be bringing these forward, at least in part. I mean, they are, because they are ambitious and because they do cover areas right across the council, that they will, I'm sure they'll come forward at varying speeds, but watch this space is what I'd like to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wellham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I seek the reassurance that I asked for when I spoke before, that the grant to Citizens Advice Mid Suffolk is index linked? The same question was raised at Baber District Council in respect of Sudbury, and I believe it was agreed there that these two allocations are index linked. So if I could have that confirmation, that would be really useful. Thank you.
I'd like to bring in Catherine at one stage just to be sure in terms of how much we can sort of commit beyond the following year's budget, and I'd sort of make the case, I think, in terms of index linking, when inflation is now below 1%, it obviously isn't as critical as it was in some of the bad old days. But myself, in terms of making sure that grants like that just don't decay by inflation, I think that is critical. And if Catherine could just respond in terms of the 3-year commitment.
I know when Overview and Scrutiny previously looked at the Citizens Advice Bureau, I think it then went as a recommendation into Cabinet that we looked at rolling 3-year funding for Citizens Advice Bureau, which from memory I think was agreed by Cabinet. I couldn't remember precisely about the index linking part of the recommendation, but I think for the grants for Mid Suffolk, if that is index linked at say something like 2%, then it's a cost of just £2,000. So that's well affordable within Mid Suffolk's budget.
Yeah, I mean, the principle I think is there and agreed. It's just obviously if that takes us beyond the May 23 elections, we can't really make any commitment beyond there, for example.
We will get that clarified, Councillor Wellham.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm now going to open up the item for debate. So if anybody wishes to debate, can you use the hands up function? I think we might be a bit debated out on this one. Okay, so I now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the vote is now in progress on your ModGov app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 9 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. So moving on now to item 10, which is MCA/20/30, and this is the Housing Revenue Account budget for 2021 to 22 and the 4-year outlook. And I'm going to ask the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, I'd now like to introduce a report on the Housing Revenue Account budget for your outlook. Since we looked at the draft budget in our 4th of January meeting, the report has subsequently been scrutinised by Mid Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Committee at their meeting. I'd like to thank that committee for their work on this, as it does form an important and integral part of our budgeting process. The committee's comments are included within our report pack today, and I'm grateful for their endorsement of this HRA budget and trust that the Cabinet will take into consideration the comments made at that meeting. There's been just some very minor changes to the numbers in the HRA budget before you today compared to January's draft. The housing management expense line has increased by 9,000, the building services expense line by 5,000. So overall, just an additional 14,000 of expense added. So accordingly, the HRA budget surplus 21-22 has reduced from the 116,000 reported in January now to 102,000. But when our annual income and expenditure totals are each over 15 million, you'll understand why I just refer to these adjustments as very minor changes. So in essence, nothing has really changed to the draft budget that Cabinet reviewed. So I've nothing further to add beyond what I've already said when introducing that report to Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny. I do, however, appreciate that members have had a few more weeks to study and contemplate the budget, and therefore will be happy to answer any further questions that they may have. And Madam Chairman, if you just indulge me for a moment before I move to the recommendations, normally I'd hold back from thanking our finance team for all their hard work on the budget until full council. But today, though, we have Sharon Bayliss with us, who's moving on from the finance team to join Cassandra Clement's team. And Sharon's role has been a linchpin in the budget preparation for several years. So I'd like to thank her now on behalf of Cabinet for all she's done over the years, and to wish her well in her new role. I'd now like to move the recommendations 3.1 to 3.7, as set out on page 87, would invite Councillor Haddingham as Cabinet Member for Housing, if she would like to second them. These recommendations include giving Cabinet endorsement to the HRA budget and 4-year outlook as it goes to full council on the 18th of February. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haddingham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the portfolio holder for housing, I would like to thank my fellow portfolio holder for finance for his introduction to the HRA budget for the year 2021 to 2022. The Assistant Director for Housing, Gavin Fist, and the Housing and Finance teams have put a lot of hard work into this report, and I'd like to thank them on behalf of the Cabinet for that. The income the HRA receives is invaluable in supporting our tenants by ensuring their homes are safe, decent, and places they're proud to call home. The work of our fantastic team supports tenants to manage and maintain their tenancies while supporting them to succeed and thrive, which during a pandemic has been an incredible achievement. I would also like to point out to members the key achievements listed on page 91 of our papers. It is evident from the report that the service is continuing to build on its solid foundations, and as such, I'm very happy to second it and the recommendations set out in it within paragraph 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Haddingham. And I'd like to endorse the entire Cabinet's and indeed the entire Council's thanks to Sharon Bayliss for the work that she's put in for this group over the last few years, and wish her well in her new role. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd endorse the thanks for Sharon as well, because I think housing, the 30-year business plan, so on the finances for housing have been particularly complex over the last few years, and I would anyone who can get their head around it fully and put together a good budget, it deserves our thanks. But I'd like to ask on recommendation 3.4 refers to the sheltered housing service increase of £1 per week. Could you tell me what that is as a percentage, please? So how much as a percentage that's increasing? Thank you very much.
Perhaps I could ask Gavin Fisk.
Sorry, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm just a bit
Oh,
slow.
you're there, sorry.
I just used my own screen calculator to do a little calculation, because the £1 increase, unlike Baber, all our, I think it's 13 or 14 sheltered housing schemes all have the same charge at the moment, which I believe is £30.83p. It might be £30.85, but that's at £1 is about 3.25% increase. I think again, I'm trying to work off memory now. I think it was £3.80 would be needed to fully recover all the costs. So the £1 is a relatively small contribution towards reducing the subsidy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you again, with my microphone switched on. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Just on that issue of sheltered housing, I really just wanted confirmation that do we consider the social value of that housing and the issues of, reduced charges on other services from the district, for the district, county, social care, public health, etc., NHS, when we consider that issue, that we do provide obviously a subsidy, but it might be a subsidy that achieves a great deal. So really, do we consider that? Was one issue, was one question. The other one really is to return to the CPI plus 1% increase for residents who obviously at the moment, like most people, are having struggle making ends meet. I know further on in sections 4.6 and 4.9, you mentioned that rent levels are at risk. You know, the risk of collecting is failing to collect rents is significant, and really once again seeking you are sure that this is not going to make that issue worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, having trouble with my buttons here, or clicking on and off. In terms of the sheltered housing and sort of wider aspects that you brought into that, I think that sort of is straying well beyond the sort of basic cabinet member finance role. So I'd probably ask Gavin to sort of make some comments on that. And in terms of the CPI plus 1%, all the adjustments over the last 6 years mean that the rent going forward in April 2021 will be only just very marginally ahead of where it was in March 16. I mean, putting any increase on anything in terms of collecting by definition would make it somewhat harder to collect. But again, I'll be happy to just defer to Gavin for his thoughts on all these matters. Thank you.
Yes, so I invite our Assistant Director for Housing, Gavin Fisk, to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Field. I think just in terms of the first question in relation to the subsidy, let's just be clear that the subsidy is in relation to the management and provision of services within each of those schemes, and that could include the services of the scheme manager, the services within the scheme, laundries, lifts, and then obviously health and safety and other factors. We did discuss at a recent cabinet meeting that actually we are going to be looking at a fundamental review of service charging in sheltered housing over the next 12 months, and my recollection was that Councillor Whitehead agreed and supported that actually that would involve cross-member involvement, and our plan is to develop that this year, subject to obviously COVID, so that work is already beginning. Just in relation to sheltered housing and that subsidy, I think actually what we provide residents is really good value for money, but what we do know is that what tenants and what potential tenants of the future actually want and require possibly will look different, and sheltered housing has to move with the times as anyone does. So I think when we're listening to the views, one thing that we often hear is it's around quality, it's around size, type, location, and benefits. And as such, I think we've already set out in our plans to conduct a sort of wider review of sheltered housing, what it is that current participants, benefactors want, but also with one eye on the future in terms of what future tenants of that service may want. And that will coincide with inevitably work with the County Council and stakeholders. Councillor Field mentioned health and others, and naturally, yes, we need to develop a sheltered housing service that not only works for us and our tenants, but the needs of our partners.
Gavin, can I just ask you just to confirm that the subsidy or the shortfall from the cost of the sheltered housing service, that subsidy is borne by people in our council-owned properties? Because the HRA is ring-fenced, so we've actually got one vulnerable group of people subsidising another different group of vulnerable people.
That would be correct, Chair. So the subsidy that we have in Mid Suffolk currently will be covered by monies into the housing revenue account. Obviously, it is a ring-fence pool, and tenants will pay their weekly rent to us as the council, and that will contribute for all of the services. We recognise and identify that those living in sheltered are vulnerable, or could be vulnerable, whether that be for a variety of reasons. But I think we do have to consider, and part of developing the service charge offer going forward would be to consider that actually you might live within a scheme in Mid Suffolk. You might receive from the benefits of someone visiting you or calling you, or maybe some of the the peace of mind that safety and security gives you in terms of living in one of those sites. Yet we might just have an individual, possibly very elderly, living just outside the scheme, doesn't receive any of those benefits, and who would be contributing to this per se. So yes, you're correct in that statement.
Lovely. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Could I just ask if supporting people funds from the county or the government via the county play any part in that arithmetic?
Chair, if I could just come back on that,
Yes.
that point. Members may or may not be aware that traditionally, some years ago, sheltered housing benefited from a supporting people charge, and that benefited those living in sheltered housing. That supporting people charge has gone over time. It's been eroded and has eventually gone. So we actually received no supporting people funding as was from the county council in this regard to provide sheltered housing services.
Thank you.
So if I may just add, and possibly being over pedantic in this, but insofar as we have a surplus on the HRA, like for this budget year, and we have reserves brought forward, to some extent it isn't quite just a bleak A or B subsidising one or the other, because there is this sort of third part in this, which is the sort of brought forward reserves and surpluses, if that makes sense.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. So where have we got to? No more questions. So does anybody wish to go to debate on this item? No. So I'm now going to ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is now in progress in your app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 9 votes for, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 11 is MCA/20/31 and is the Council Tax Hardship Fund. And again, I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce this report.
Thank you. I'm glad I got a drink by my side. It's a soft drink, by the way. I'd like to introduce now report MCA 2031. It starts on page 97 of our report pack. During the early stage of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government allocated to each district council a sum of money to form a hardship fund. This is available until the 31st of March 21, was aimed at giving a council tax discount of up to £150 to any working age household in receipt of local council tax support. Here in Mid-Suffolk, we have a strong ethos of looking after our most vulnerable residents. We have a generous local council tax reduction scheme, which allows up to 95% discount on the council tax payable. This actually means that many residents on the scheme have less than £150 council tax to pay for the year. Now, the number of claimants has risen during the year in line with increasing unemployment and was anticipated to grow more sharply with the end of the furlough scheme. However, as the furlough scheme has now been extended into 2021, the amount of the hardship fund spent has in fact fallen short of the funds available by approximately 30%. This report is therefore before us to consider and make a recommendation about how the remaining balance is allocated to those most in need of support. Now, having considered the 3 options set out in the report, the recommended course of action is that a further award is made to those that have already received some money, while retaining sufficient money to accommodate those that will be making a new claim before the end of March. The level of additional award will be adjusted to ensure that the fund is fully allocated but not overcommitted by the end of the financial year. This ensures that the fund is used in its entirety in accordance with the original guidance from the government. I'd like to propose the recommendation set out in 3.1 and 3.2 on page 100 and would ask for a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Who would like to second?
Councillor Flatman, Chair. Very happy to second the report on the council tax hardship fund and spending it all.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Flatman. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Field.
Just a couple of points. I note you're mentioning the amount of arrears in this fund, and I wonder if you could clarify a couple of points there. We're talking about 274 people who have arrears, averaging £485 per person. That looks like about 3 years at the rate we're talking about. But the largest open case owes 2,795. I just wondered how anyone gets to that level, you know, what it implies. And should I be concerned about the way we're managing those owings, if you like? So that's one issue. The second one really is, there's two such statements in 3.1 and 3.2. One of them says you'll exhaust the fund, so you'll adjust payments to get the fund exhausted by the end of its allotted time. And then 3.2 says that any residual balance will be applied. I couldn't see how there'd be a residual balance if you exhausted the fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. We've actually got Amy Mays from the Shared Revenues Partnership with us today, and her team has done a fantastic job over this last year with everything that's been going on with benefits, etc., with COVID. So first of all, I'd like to her to take forward a thanks to our cabinet for all that work. But if I could ask Amy to, if she's able to address those particular questions that Councillor Field has raised.
Certainly, happy to. Hopefully you can see me. I wasn't sure whether my camera was working. Certainly, Councillor Field, you raised the question about the arrears in the first instance. Mm-hmm. I should be clear that this amount of hardship fund won't address arrears per se. It is to look at a residual balance. So customers who had a liability to pay in 2021 can have hardship applied to that liability, rather than we're using the money to clear previous year arrears. So it would only be if people had a residual balance for 2021. Councillor is right in that some of our customers have got more than 1 year outstanding, and we are working as best we can to work with them to look at reducing the arrears. However, particularly this year, the council took a very soft approach on how we were going to tackle arrears. So we've been trying to work with customers, come to an arrangement, but not pursue arrears in a rigorous manner at all. As to the councillor's second point about the residual balance, we are looking at making an award at a set amount, and it's likely that there will be pennies and pence difference. So rather than, because we've got over 2,400 live customers in receipt of working tax, it's very difficult to get it to the exact amount. So if we've got less than a few thousand, we won't be able to spread it evenly throughout all the customers, but we're looking still to be able to exhaust that. One particular instance might be that somebody who has only recently claimed council tax reduction, we're not able to backdate council tax reduction now because the rules don't allow us to do that. So whilst they will be entitled to hardship, it will only be hardship from now rather than the rest of the year. So we could use the discretionary financial assistance to give them an award pro rata for the whole of the year as if they had claimed earlier. And that is our intention, to use the residual funds in that way.
Thank you. That sounds good. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Field. Thank you, Amy. Any other questions? No. Does anybody wish to debate this item? No. Then I'm going to ask the governance officer to conduct the electronic vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is now in progress. Just waiting on one more vote, Chair. Thank you, members. That is 9 votes for, Chair. That's a unanimous.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Item 12 is MCA/20/32, and this is the Laxfield Neighbourhood Plan. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Planning to introduce this report. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, councillors, the report before you updates Cabinet on the Laxfield Neighbourhood Plan, and it sets out 2 recommendations, which you can see on the first page of the report on page 105 of your papers. These are that the parish council be instructed to modify their plan in accordance with the independent examiner's recommendations, and secondly, subject to satisfactory completion of that task, it seeks approval for this plan to be advanced to a local referendum. The Laxfield Neighbourhood Plan follows a tried and tested formula. Once modified, it will contain 18 policies covering housing, the natural environment, design, infrastructure and services. It also provides for a level of new housing growth that is consistent with the requirements set out in our joint local plan. There is also a comprehensive suite of community actions that are linked to individual policies. Paragraph 4.2 of the report sets out the key stages prior to examination. The examination itself is discussed in paragraphs 4.3 to 4.5. The modifications of note update this plan to reflect changes on the ground in terms of both existing and recently approved planning permissions. They also refer to last October's Court of Appeal ruling on the appropriate wording for local green space policies, and they allow for updating supporting text where it refers to the current status of the joint local plan. At paragraph 4.8, you will see confirmation that our officers have looked at those modifications and are in agreement that all should be made. So it only remains for me to ask your neighbourhood planning officer to continue working with the parish council to ensure that these modifications are made in a timely manner, and subject to the satisfactory completion of them, ask Cabinet to agree that this plan be advanced to a local referendum at the earliest opportunity. So I so move the recommendations and ask if anyone will be willing to second that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clapman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm absolutely delighted to second the report on the Laxfield Neighbourhood Plan, and I'd just like to thank Paul Bryant and all the officers that have worked on the Neighbourhood Plan and given us so much advice. And I think we probably started about 4 years ago when we first had those meetings, and here we are now. So well done, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fatman. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody wish to debate this item? So I will now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 9 votes for. That again is unanimous.
Lovely, thank you very much. Well done, Laxfield. So now going on to item 13, which is MCA/20/33, and this is the Wilby Neighbourhood Plan. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Planning, Councillor Byrne, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chairman. This report updates Cabinet on the Wilby Neighbourhood Plan. It sets out 2 recommendations, first of which I will come back to shortly, and those recommendations you will now be familiar with. The first, that the Parish Council be instructed to modify their plan in accordance with the independent examiner's recommendations, and secondly, that subject to satisfactory completion of that task, it seeks approval for this plan to be advanced to a local referendum. The Wilby Neighbourhood Plan sets out 10 policies grouped around 3 key objectives: the natural environment, housing and the built environment, and community. As set out in paragraph 4.5 of the report, the policies only required limited change. Most of this work has been focused on ensuring that supporting text is up to date, especially where this refers to our emerging joint local plan. The modification process has therefore been quite straightforward and consequently has been completed. In other words, the requirement of the first recommendation has been met. Turning back quickly to the plan itself, it should provide sufficient guidance to enable effective decision making at the local level. So it only remains for me to ask Cabinet to agree that this plan now be advanced to a local referendum at the earliest opportunity. That is the motion, and I would ask one of my colleagues to second that, please.
Thank you. Councillor Flatman.
Thank you, Chair. Just the same as before, I'm so delighted to bring this, to second this neighbourhood plan. And for such a small community, I think they've done really, really well. And again, thank you to everybody who was involved at the very beginning. And that's obviously Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody wish to debate this item? In which case I will ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. The vote is now in progress, members. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 9 votes for.
Lovely, thank you very much, and congratulations to Wilby Parish for the completion of this thus far. Thank you. Now, the next item is a confidential minute from the meeting on the 4th of January. I don't feel that it's necessary to enter into closed session for this, unless anybody's got any questions on the minute. So I wonder if anybody would like to raise their hand if they've got a question, and then we can decide whether or not we need to go into a confidential session in order to approve it. No? Okay, so we'll remain in open session then. So do I have a proposer for the confidential minute, which is item 15, MCA/20/33? No, that can't be right. I think the reference is wrong on this one because it's the same reference as the Wilby Neighbourhood Plan, but in the paper itself, it's got a Baber reference. So I'll just refer to it by its title, which is the confidential minute of Mid-Suffolk Cabinet on Monday, the 4th of January. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Chair. Regardless of the correct agenda number, I'm happy to propose the confidential minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Brewster?
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brewster. So I'll ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies about the reference number. That was my fault. Okay. Let me just start this vote now. Okay, sorry members, the vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that again is unanimous, 9 votes for.
Thank you very much indeed. So the minutes of this meeting have been confirmed and will be signed at the next practicable opportunity. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday, the 8th of March at 2:30 in the afternoon. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much for your participation, everybody.